Hello everybody and welcome back to Free Flow with Saoirse Rattigan. I am currently on cycle day 20, so I'm in my luteal phase in autumn, and in today's video I thought we'd do a bit of a cycle 101. So we're going to be discussing the basics of a period versus a cycle, and talking a little bit about menarche and menopause, and also the big red rule. So that's what we're going to discuss on today's video. I do have my little laptop over here just because it's got like a presentation that I did. That's kind of a workshop really, but I did quite a few slides on this topic, so I'm just having it here because I am in luteal phase. It is prime time for brain fog, and I'm trying to keep these videos succinct enough for fellow ADHDers, so if I glance down a bit, that's why. Also, just before we dive in, can we just take a moment to appreciate these beautiful earrings that my boyfriend's mum got me from the Cayman Islands? They're just so pretty. I'm not really doing them justice, but I daren't move my phone now that I've got it set up in the right space. But it's just this beautiful green colour, and it kind of works with the top, but I just think they're very, very pretty. So it's my little show and tell. So first of all, I thought we'd dive into what is a cycle. And I know maybe that sounds really daft to a lot of you listening, but I remember when I first started charting, I was like, well, what's a period and what's a cycle? Like, what's the difference? So the menstrual cycle is the monthly cycle of hormonal changes that a woman's body goes through. And that's obviously in preparation for a potential pregnancy. I do try to keep the language inclusive in this discussion, so forgive me if I go a little bit AWOL. But it begins on, so the cycle begins on the first day of menstruation, and then it ends the day before the next period starts. So we have our cycle. And then within that we have the seasons, which I have some videos on. So if you wanna hear more about them, then please go and have a little look. Just because it's really great language that Red School kind of provides to have these discussions. So you have your cycle, and then obviously you have your period, and periods tend to vary, anything really from sort of 3 days to sort of 7 days. The only people I've had discussions with where they've had longer periods is because they've had something like the coil or the implant fitted. So that's a bit of a different case. And it's also worth noting that if you have, so I'm getting really weird shadows on my glasses, so it's also worth noting that if you are on the pill, absolutely no judgment, because I was on it myself. I was on different types myself back in my uni days. I'll be honest, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole now after doing a lot of research on it. But if you're on the pill and then it's one of those pills where you have a break for like a week, that is not a real period. That's just synthetic. So that isn't a real period. And I feel like a lot of people don't know that. I didn't when I was on it. Was years later, and I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that was like synthetic hormones, and it wasn't actually a real period. So there's lots of things that we have been programmed or coerced, as was really in the beginning with regards to the pill. There was a lot of coercion involved there, or we've made an informed choice to take, but that can affect our periods and our cycles, so and also our general health and well-being. So I won't fall down that rabbit hole too much, but yeah, so you've got your the first day of menstruation, and what I term, or what Red School coin as inner winter. I know some people who have the they decide that inner spring, so when your period stops, is like the first day of a new cycle. So that is up for debate, and I just think, well, it's not really up for debate. I think it's just what feels best for you. For me, I feel like the start of a new journey is always beginning with letting go of the old. So for me, in a kind of a spiritual way, and just a way that for me just makes sense and makes me feel rooted and grounded, for me, the first day of my period, my bleed, that for me is the first day of my cycle. But you can obviously choose what works for you, and if you do follow something different, I'd love to know, in the comments below. Okay, so just those little caveats there. So during this time, the body obviously prepares for ovulation and the release of an egg from the ovary, and then the egg travels down the fallopian tube where it can be fertilized by sperm, And obviously if fertilization does not occur, then the uterus sheds its lining during menstruation. Oh, and we even have here, so I wrote before, so the average menstrual cycle lasts 28 days, but it can range anywhere from 21 to 35 days. And from people that I've spoken with when I did the Red School Menstrual Leadership Program, I noticed a lot of theirs tended to be maybe 35 days, those sort of longer days, the older that they got before they were going into premenstruum. Okay. back to the slides. So then we have what is a period. So periods or menstruation is a natural and a normal process that happens in people with a uterus. It is a sign that the body is working normally and that the person is able to become pregnant. So anyway, so during a period, the lining of the uterus is shed along with blood, menstrual fluid and tissue. The average length of a period, I've put 3 to 5 days, but I've heard more of like three. I have heard up to 7. Mine used to be like 7 days, probably pre-uni days, maybe even in uni. But to be honest, because I was so like, I wasn't tracking my cycle, I couldn't really say for sure because it was so long ago. And that's why I think it's so important for people to just track from the offset. I remember like a week would go by, or not a week would go by, sorry, like you know, a month would go by, or like, you know, a few weeks would go by, and you know, I'd be surprised because I'm like, oh god, I'm on my period again, like how did that happen, you know? Or I'd just be like, when was I last on it and stuff. So it wasn't something that I used to track for, you know, a lot of the time when I was younger, which to be honest was kind of daft because I did a lot of like dance shows and things like that, and it would have been really nice to have a heads up of like, okay, yeah, so I think my first, for me, my Menarche, my first bleed was actually during a dance show. It was just before. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's been an interesting journey. So some people experience other symptoms such as cramping, headaches, bloating, mood changes during their periods, and it's really important to pay attention to yours to see what is you know, what comes up for you. And as I think I've said in previous videos, or although those videos might be coming out in the future because I'm filming it all a bit backwards because it's me, we're not really supposed to need to have you know, painkillers when we're on our bleed. I notice that the more I rest, which is really challenging, but the more I rest during my bleed, the less likely I am to reach for painkillers, which is really challenging. And I try and build in like scaffolding, you know, structure in rest when I'm working and when I have busier, you know, I just happen to have busier stuff going on in my life. So it's not always easy. But I do also think it's really important to realise that like we're not supposed to need to have loads of medication. If you're having a lot of medication, either because you're having physical cramps or if you're having like migraines is quite a big one. I've had quite a few people I know that get really bad migraines, things like that. I think that's an indication of other things going on, whether that is with your period. It might be that you is it PCOS? I know that's something that some people have, you know, horrendous experience with. Endo is another one. For me, it's often really been about mental health and how that's like kind of very tumultuous throughout specific parts in the cycle. So that's an area where I really focus on a lot. And I'd love, you know, if other people who watch this, if people actually watch any of these videos and you have experience with different things, especially maybe with more physical health issues during your cycle, then it would be really cool to like get you on here and have a discussion about that, because it's not something that I am going to pretend I'm an expert in, because it's not something I necessarily have experience in. But what I do know is that, you know, the cycle is really a really great indicator of our health and our wellness. And if it's in so much pain that it really disrupts your daily activities, that is something that, you know, I would say look into, whether that's with a doctor. If you find, and I don't mean to be rude to doctors, but if you find they don't listen, because I've had that issue in the past as well, then you need to look into it even further, whether that's with a more specialist place. A lot of people seem to have had really good experiences with Chinese medicine, specifically things like acupuncture, so that could be worth looking into. And obviously there's so many, you know, support groups and things online. So I just want to remind you that like if you are having painful periods for whatever reason, whether it's mentally or physically, emotionally, you're not alone. It's not just you that it's happening to, and there are people that can help you. Sometimes, unfortunately, that means we have to do a lot of digging because a lot of these topics are still very taboo. But anyway, that was just my little my little Dear Diary moment. Sorry, my thing's just okay, so yeah, regular periods can be managed with lifestyle changes such as exercising, eating a balanced diet, getting enough rest. And if you experience any symptoms or irregularities, it's important to see your healthcare provider to discuss any possible treatment. So again, you know, we can look into, I know some people again that have spoken about, they used to have like much heavier periods or longer periods, and now they've really adjusted, you know, they're eating and they're sleeping, and they found that those periods are now like 3 to 5 days and they're a lot more manageable. For me, I tend to find the first couple of days quite heavy, and then 4 and 5 are really very light. 5 sometimes is just spotting, and actually sometimes I kind of miss it, because for me, when I'm on my period, it's just like it's not a good excuse, it's just like a permission slip for me to drop the bundle, and I kind of miss sometimes like not having that. It's a bit like if you're really poorly, you get like a really horrible flu or something, and then you're like, well, I just actually have to just rest, like I just have to rest. Like that for me is like, I don't have to like feel guilty for this, you know, and I shouldn't feel guilty for it anyway, but ex-workaholic, so what can you do? Working on it. I also have a little note here about charting with the moon. I do have a whole other video on charting with the moon, which should actually be out at the same time as this one, so please do go and have a look at that. So those of you that don't have a bleed, or you're on the pill, or for whatever reason you don't have a bleed and you want to connect with your cycle, then please do check that video out. I do have a little caveat here that I actually didn't put in that video, but it does say if you enjoy seeing where your cycle is syncing with the moon, you can go online and check which phase the moon is in. So sometimes, like, yeah, if I'm not, because I have a bleed, so I just go with my own body, but from my charting, I have noticed that when I'm coming up to my bleed, so in autumn luteal phase, on a full moon then I have a lot of restless energy, and I kind of have to choose, no, I do choose, but it's a bit of trial by fire, but I choose to take more time for grounding, for baths. I find being in water like very, very comforting, so like nice baths, reflective journaling, and this kind of helps me to avoid overwhelm and meltdowns. I'll be honest, it's always a work in progress because of having ADHD, and you know, not always being as tight with like sleep especially, and like diet and things like that as I could be. So for me, I think that's always a work in progress, but it's just something I've noticed around the full moon. And you can also use, like I said in the other video, the phases of the moon if you don't bleed. So day 1, the first day of bleeding, would be on the new moon, but there's more in the other video. I also know if there's a full moon coming and I'm ovulating, I just have to create, and I'm probably not going to get a lot of sleep. But so it's really important for me to know what it is I want to create, because I'll have a lot of like worry, quite scattered energy, and if I can just kind of focus it enough to do the thing to kind of produce something, it's a lot easier, especially because I often will struggle to sleep if I'm ovulating and there's a full moon. I just really find it really, really difficult. And sometimes I'm like, you know, that's okay to like, maybe that's okay to like not sleep that well for a couple of nights, but as long as I'm doing something productive or creative, or something that is like fueling or giving some good stuff to future source. It might even be like, I wouldn't do this at the moment because I don't live alone, but if I lived alone, it might even be like just cooking a load of food for like luteal phase and in a winter, like for menstrual phase. Might even be doing things like that, you know. So yeah, finding something where that energy can be put into to benefit future me, I find just helps my mental health. Okay, so a little bit about Menarche then. So there's this really beautiful Native American saying, and it says, at her first bleed, a woman meets her power. During her bleeding years, she practices it. At menopause, she becomes it. And so Menarche is our first bleed. So as I was saying, mine was during a dance show that I do, I think every 2 years, or just before then. And there was, when I did the menstrual leadership program with Shanae and Alexandra last year, year before, we did this beautiful meditation, and it kind of took us back to our menarche, and I think that's a really nice thing to be able to practice. So I think if you do have like a tumultuous relationship, especially with your inner spring, so if we look at the phases of life, inner spring would be mirrored in that kind of youthful teens, maybe very early 20s. Ovulation would be sort of 20s to 30s. Perimenopause would be sort of 38, 40s, and then menopause and postmenopause would be, you know, 50s, 60s. So if we break that down, there's also like a lot of work, a lot of healing that potentially maybe needs to come through, and that would maybe signify during your inner spring part of your cycle. If you struggle with that area, it might be that one of the ways you can help yourself with that is to revisit menarche through meditation, a journaling practice, and maybe there's a bit of healing that needs to be done there. Just a thought. And then we have, but yeah, I mean, going back to menarche, sorry, so yeah, I think it's really important that we get more information out there, especially with like cycle tracking. I mean, I have my guide, Ready Steady Chart, which I'm really proud of. It's super simple. It's in, you know, it'll be in the comments linked and stuff, but it's really fun, and it just gives you some little hacks and tips and tricks, and it just gives us this language to have these discussions with, because I feel like years and years ago you would have these discussions with the older people in your family. You'd have those like intergenerational discussions, so like grandma and your mom and things, and you would have those discussions, and it would be word of mouth being passed down. And I feel like we kind of have, there's potentially less of that these days because those topics have become stigmatized or quite taboo, and I think that's shedding, but it's still very much quite prevalent. And you also, it might just be like culturally, it might not be culturally appropriate or deemed culturally appropriate with, you know, within your family to discuss those kinds of things, but then, you know, then people aren't having the information that I think they need, and I really think it's life-changing. So yeah, having things like period parties, you know, first period parties, and just having those discussions, I think the earlier on the better, because it does, you know, it's a whole different level. It brings so many levels to our wellness and our well-being. And, you know, I think one really small thing that kind of springs to mind is like how I remember when I was sort of in my teens, I was very, very, I had a lot of body dysmorphia and facial dysmorphia issues, which can still kind of raise their ugly heads a bit. So I have to keep my eyes on it, but definitely had a lot of like comparison. And this was like before social media. This was like pre-Facebook, guys. So I can't even imagine what it's like to be a teen nowadays. And I think that there's already so much comparison. So one thing that pops into my mind, and obviously anorexia, things like that, they can happen at, you know, at any age, and also to different genders. But I think that it's probably very prevalent in young teens, and because of the level of comparison, and also because the way the hormones are changing and the body's growing at different speeds, and it might be to different way that your friend is, and obviously having a period or lack of period, if you're not eating enough food, is a really great indicator of general well-being. So I think it also kind of would teach at a younger age to work with the cycle, in cycle, rather than against the cycle. And that will have a knock-on effect for so many areas of, you know, things like mental health and things as well, and even just how, you know, when you exercise and what you do during those different phases of the cycle. So start them young is what I'm saying. Right, and then menopause, I'll just do a little ditty on menopause. So yeah, perimenopause and menopause are just really huge topics as well, and I do have to say that doing the work that I do, I feel so much better prepared for peri and also menopause, and I'm really, really grateful for like pioneers like Shanae and Alexandra of Red School, and a lot of the people that joined for the menstrual leadership program really shared their insights, and it was so just so fruitful and so brave of them to share those insights. And just it really held that, I think in society, women of a certain age are kind of deemed like they're just sort of forgotten about, they're kind of cast aside. I mean, I remember Meryl Streep speaking about this in like an interview, maybe with Graham Norton, Love him. And you know, that's so far from the truth. Like, there's still so much that they have to offer, even if they're not like spring chickens, and that's what like society, you know, deems as, you know, attractive. There's still so much that they have to offer, and I think a big part of the challenge of menopause from listening to those discussions is that like people feel like they're being cast aside now, and that's, you know, that's incredibly painful. So yeah, I think like learning a bit more about menopause, I don't know loads and loads because it's not something I've been through, but I feel like very grateful for pioneers in this field, for their support, the structure, the language used, to help to, you know, convert, to convey, or to, you know, to educate people that haven't yet experienced it. And also, of course, you know, menopause can happen earlier for different reasons, whether it's health reasons. There's a few reasons why you might go through an early menopause. So having this knowledge, again, having this knowledge sooner rather than later, I think just is only going to be a better thing. I think, apart from the big red rule, I'm just looking at my sheet of paper that I just dropped on the floor. I think that was most of the things. Yeah, I did put kind of harness your hormones. I didn't go into specifics of hormones in this video, but I do have a video about the hormones. Well, there's a couple where it's more in the inner seasons video that I haven't yet filmed, but I have done the breakdown of those. So I've done like inner autumn 101, like luteal phase, and the different seasons. I've kind of done the single ones of those, and I do discuss the hormone fluctuations per inner season in those. So if you wanted to know a bit more about the hormones, check those out, or some of them might be out already, some of them are still probably coming. And yeah, finally, the big red rule. So the big red rule is really something that's coined by Alexandra and Shanae of Red School, and it basically says that the big red rule is that your own experience trumps everything else. So if everything I've just said in this video you're like, oh, that's not my experience, that's okay. It probably isn't as prevalent to this video, but it might be when I speak about, you know, other things, other topics. And yeah, the big red rule is that your own experience really just trumps it. So if you are, it might be that someone, you know, suggests something. A good thing would be in the moon video where I talk about charting with the moon. You can obviously chart with the moon, as in the first day of your cycle would be the new moon, but for some people it works better as the first day of their cycle is the full moon. So that's just one way that, like, you know, you listen to your own body. I, for example, cycle day 1 and 2, I am not going to the gym, or 3, I'm not going to the gym to do a hardcore workout. Absolutely no bloody way. I feel so tired and awful when I do that. I know I just need to rest. You might be like, I hit my personal best on cycle day 1 and 2, you know? So again, how? But okay, so I ran out of space on my iPhone again. This happened last time I was filming. It drives me nuts, and this is several hours later because I've had to just sort out a load of stuff with my iPad and my iPhone. Anyway, what I was saying is that you might feel like you hit your personal best at the gym on during your period, in which case more power to you. That's fine, but that's just an example of following the big red rule. So that was all I wanted to finish saying. So thank you very much for joining me on this episode, and I look forward to the next time. If you've enjoyed this as well, I do have a podcast where I dive even deeper with my cousin Julia, so make sure you check that out. And yeah, appreciate the support. Thanks so much. Okay, see you folks. Bye.